Welcome to Belief Busters Podcast, where we change the world one belief at a time. True transformation happens when we question if the beliefs we hold are of truth, or simply someone else's belief that we have internalized as our own. I'm your host, Rev. Cherie Taylor-Jones, and I'm glad you could join us on the journey. When we talk about spirituality, it's very rarely that we also talk about sexuality. So I want to make our listeners aware that on this episode of Belief Busters Podcast, we are going to be talking about sexuality. You'll hear terms like BDSM, swingers, masturbation. So if you're uncomfortable with the subject or those terms, visit and listen to another episode. For those of you on the journey of self-discovery and realizing that wholeness means embracing both the physical and the spiritual, then this is the podcast for you. We want to give you permission to really live a juicy, fulfilling life. And your sexuality is part of that. And we want to give you permission to explore and know that God is pleased with you as you discover all that you are. So I hope that you enjoy this episode on Belief Busters Podcast. I'm super excited today to have this conversation about human sexuality, especially looking at it from the religious stigma that is placed on human sexuality. And today we have Dan Powers engaging with us in this sure to be lively conversation. Dan, would you do the honors and just tell us a little bit about you?
So my name is Dan Powers. I've been studying human sexuality for about 18 years. I am a former software engineer with an MBA who started companies, been in the high-tech industry for a long time, and I got burned out from it. I met a woman. Well, so originally I was married, had 2 kids, and we couldn't really talk about sex in our relationship.
Okay.
And every marriage and family therapist we talked to really couldn't talk to us about sex either. And it was a big problem. So eventually we got divorced, and I met a woman who introduced me to the world of Tantra. And that was the first time that I had had a conversation about sex that wasn't sophomoric, how many notches in my bedpost have I gotten kind of thing.
Yes.
It was really a beautiful capacity to have conversation around sex, around pleasure, things like that. So being the engineer, I wanted to go off and learn everything I could about sex. And I initially explored the academic world, and I found that they really were focused on dysfunction. And I wasn't really interested in that. I wanted the more practical pleasure aspect of it. And so I started taking classes in Tantra, and basically every course that I could that was out there, including some academic courses, as well as conferences and things like that. And eventually what I've learned is something that I'm putting together in a package called the pleasure engineering. And it's a combination of sexological bodywork, Tantra, surrogate partner therapy, erotic blueprints. I mean, just everything that I've encountered over my 18 years, I'm applying into this. And the thing that I like to tell everybody is don't ever think that there's one specific way to have sex. What I want to do is give you the information, and you can choose what's the best way for you.
Where do you think people get their idea of that there really is only one acceptable type of sexual relationship to have? And usually it's geared towards procreation.
Right. Well, from the Bible, from organized religion. I think that that's something that's really relevant and prevalent in our culture. We think that missionary sex is the only form of sex that we're supposed to have. If you watch the movie, this movie is not yet rated. They talked about in there that the way the MPAA classifies movies is that it's an R rating until they start doing things that are out of the ordinary, and then it becomes NC-17. If a woman is on top, if a woman is, doing something that's not normal, what we consider normal missionary style position sex. I don't even know if it's in the Bible itself as much as just the religious dogma that I hear out there.
I think you're right in that it is the religious dogma. The early church fathers did a lot of interpreting of what they saw God as and what they saw as the appropriate behavior for someone who follows God. So I do see that the sexuality itself was really non-existent. It was strictly driven for procreation to expand the population in Christendom, for in this example, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I was growing up, there were lots of rules and regulations about what was considered a good girl, a good Catholic girl versus someone who was considered loose or immoral, right? And you were supposed to save yourself for marriage. That was what the gearing was for me. And anything besides that was considered sinful. And I would consider a lot of our listeners really come from that modality as well, that understanding that we can't be sexual creatures, that there's something against God if we are sexual. So I kind of want to give people some permission on embracing their sexuality, that when you think about God, it's really what humankind's understanding of God is in their limited capacity.
Yeah, I think that's really true. One of my mentors used to say, sex is bad, sex is dirty, save it for the one you love. So, it doesn't even make sense that, we have these hormones that are raging through our bodies, at now I think it's even earlier, like 11, 10, 11, 12. For me, it was 14, 15, where we have these hormones that are raging through our bodies that are telling us we want to procreate. We want to engage in these sexual activities. Yet we're supposed to hold that off because we're not animals. We're, thinking sentient beings. Like, well, I disagree with that. I think we are animals. And we've got these directives that are trying to tell us that we need to do something, but we try to repress it. And I think it comes out sideways the more we try to repress it. And then it's like, oh, suddenly when we get married, sex is supposed to be really great and happy and wonderful and all that. Even though it was this really dirty, sinful kind of action.
Yes.
I have to say, I love the Catholic Church. I love the Southern Baptists. I love the Mormons, because that's where I get most of my clients from.
No, man, naughty, but yes.
I know, but it's true. The recovering Catholics, they've got so much guilt that is associated with their sexuality that when they start to get to, I think around the age of 40, they start. So this has been my observation. There's no scientific evidence behind this at all, except for my observation. They seem to, as they're getting into their 40s, if they have kids, they're getting older, they're starting to want to have sex, they're starting to become sexual beings themselves. They're either divorced or they're in a marriage that is basically sexless at this point in time. And that's a whole other subject that we can talk about at some point. And they start this awakening for themselves. It's saying, I'm seeing all these sexual messages that are out there. I'm seeing people that are having fun sex and pleasurable sex, and I want some of that. And I would say that the primary range of my clientele is 45 to 55 years old, where they are having these sexual awakenings, these sexual feelings, and they're starting to wake up, especially, even going through menopause. A lot of women think, oh, well, once menopause hits me, then I'm done sexually. Well, the women that are coming to me are saying, wait a minute, I can't get pregnant anymore. let's
Correct.
go to town. Let's start
Yeah.
having some sex and playing with this. And so, yeah, I'd say the majority, the bell curve of my clients is probably 45 to 55.
Yeah, that makes sense. It really does. Menopause has gotten a negative rap because for many women, there's a peak in sexuality that happens around that with the hormones and with the not having to procreate anymore. And now this can be something that we just have for ourselves. What a
Hmm.
concept.
Absolutely.
And where do we now give ourselves permission to be sexual beings that still have a relationship with God and the universe? And there becomes now some huge confusion again about how do we honor our sexuality and honor the divine.
I had a friend who was in the church, and I used to do an event called Beyond the Bedroom, which was a consumer event, sex education event. And the idea was, let's bring all these experts from all these different arenas that can talk about some of the stuff so that the consumers can learn what's available to them. As I said before, I'm not going to tell you the best way to have sex, whether you want to be polyamorous or a BDSM or swinger or whatever. I don't care. I want to give you the information so you can make an informed choice. So this woman was religious, and she actually talked about the Bible being rife with sex. And if you read the Bible, which I'm sure you have, I've read parts of it, but it's all about this person knew that person and knowing that person. There's sex all over the place in that, and validity of being able to have sex outside of the procreation. But she absolutely was in belief that that is in the Bible.
We can tease and try to figure out where it comes from, but I think the reality that we're dealing with is wherever it comes from, there are religions that are male dominated, no, slight on your part, male dominated, in which women are expected to have this very monogamous, rigid context for their sexuality towards procreation. And how do we give these women permission to be sexual beings, not for the sake of marriage? I mean, of course, I get that there's a relationship in there, but also really to honor that sex is pleasurable and not a sin, to self punish, over sexuality and sexual feelings.
Yeah. So the interesting one to me is that the clitoris is the only organ in both men and women's bodies that is designed purely for pleasure. So why would God put something like that in a woman? That doesn't make sense to me either.
Right.
So he's created hormones in our bodies. He's given us these drives. And I think the real honoring is when you are honoring your body and honoring your desires in that way. I think you're honoring yourself and the universe, whether that's God or whatever you want to attribute to that. I think women have just as much sexual desires as men. They've
Mhm.
repressed it. They feel like they're not supposed to have it, so they've repressed it their entire lives. I take no offense at all at saying a male-dominated religious world, because it is so true. And I'm ashamed as a man that that's the case. I think that it would be more valuable, even in our government, if we brought more women in, at these higher levels to make these higher decisions for us, because I think that men have really screwed this world up at this point in time. So I think it'd be more valuable if we did have these women in these positions. But women have sexual desires, so why not act on them? Why not enjoy yourself? If you feel that it's not right to be with another man, okay, great. But self-pleasure, it's healthy to self-pleasure. It's healthy to have sex. Women actually receive a bit of testosterone from male semen when they've had intercourse and the man's ejaculated inside of them. So it's beneficial all the way around. It reduces the stress levels. I remember when they had hysteria, Back in the early 1900s, and they actually had doctors that were literally diddling
Masturbating.
women
Yes.
because they were too sexually uptight, or they were just uptight in general. To me, that's screaming of there's value to women self-pleasuring or having sex with their partner or other partners. I say give women permission to have as much sex as they want to have.
Cool. So how do we deal with the psychology of this? How do we deal with undoing the internalized beliefs that really aren't of truth, right? That says a woman shouldn't feel pleasure or be sexually driven. How do we support them in that?
I think it's actually starting to happen a lot. If you watch the Goop series on Netflix, season 3 is dedicated to sex. And they've got a number of different kinds of practitioners. They've got Jaya, who founded the Erotic Blueprints. They've got a woman in there who is a sexological bodyworker. And they've got several other people who are, there's one that does something like the family constellations, which I'm not too familiar with, and some other people as well. And these kinds of shows are starting to, I believe, change people's views of women's views in particular on sex. If they take ownership, and I'm talking to women, of their sexuality, then they're going to start to expand their horizons, and the men are going to have to follow along. But that's what I see with my clients. I am a sexological bodyworker in addition to a number of other things. And I've seen women have these huge awakenings around their bodies and what's available to them. And, some of them start crying, they're in their 60s or their 70s because saying, I've wasted my entire life not knowing this was available. And now I've just discovered it. My life is over. Like, well, your life's not over.
Right.
It's not even close to being over.
Right.
But yeah, there's been a lot of wasted time. So get out there and start playing around, having fun, enjoying yourself, enjoying your body, whether it's your self-pleasure or bringing partners in. That's the message that I try to bring to the women who come to me is stay safe. Don't go out there and have sex for the wrong reasons. And the wrong reason to me is, the helping your self-image. If you're going out there because, if I know this guy's going to have sex with me and I feel better about myself, and then he kind of goes away, it's like, well, there's a dip down there. And then you go out to another guy and another guy, another guy. That's not healthy sex. If you're going out there because you enjoy sex, then great. And I've seen this in the swinger scene. And I'm not a swinger, but I know a bunch of swingers. I have been in the swinger scene before. Mm-hmm. And I've seen women who have really are empowered around their sexuality and have a drive to have sex and love sex. And I think they're some of the most empowered women because they're empowered not only around sexuality, but that empowers them in life.
Join us next time on Belief Busters for the conclusion of this episode. If you are enjoying these conversations about assessing your belief systems and how to transform outdated beliefs, then please subscribe and give us a positive review. To support this podcast and its transformative work, you can also become a sponsor for as little as $5 a month. You can reach Rev Cherie at info@beliefbusterspodcast.org. To continue on this journey of evolution, you can also get my book, Turning Your Why into Why Not, at Amazon or any other bookstores, which gives you practical tools to do this work. See you next time on the flip side.